Hello and welcome, I'm Riz Khan. This episode of the show continues my fascinating conversation with the highly outspoken best-selling author and evolutionary behavioral scientist, Dr. Gad Saad. In the first part, he took us through the risks presented by what he calls the parasitic mind, based on his widely popular book of the same title, exploring how human thought processes can give up rational ideas to support irrational ideologies. In this episode, the professor turns his critical lens to Islam, a religion he considers to be a major threat to peace and stability in the world. As I spoke with him in his hometown in Montreal in Canada, he justified his concerns, pointing to what he sees as a huge influx of Muslim immigrants into the city.
Could I have predicted, based on the immigration patterns in Montreal, whether Jew hatred was going to go up or go down in Montreal? It doesn't take a fancy professor to give you that prognosis, right? Or that prediction. Well, and the reality is there's been an orgiastic, exponential increase in Jew hatred in Montreal. And it's largely driven by the fact of these demographic changes. So we have to be able to say that openly without being accused of Islamophobia.
Professor Saad also previewed the concept in his upcoming book, Suicidal Empathy, where he posits that irrational support for policies such as open border immigration is behind the increasing destabilization of societal cohesion. Talk a little bit about the ostrich parasitic syndrome. I found this quite interesting.
Yes, so that's chapter 6. So there I'm using the metaphor of the ostrich that buries its head in the sand to avoid reality.
Which, as you say, they don't actually do.
Which I was going to say, which they don't do, but everybody now understands this as an apt metaphor of going, la, 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 I don't want to hear it. And so in the book, I say that that's a really very dangerous malady because, to my earlier point about never being willing to change your opinion about something, despite the incontrovertible facts that I am showing you, that's a manifestation of ostrich parasitic syndrome. So, and the example that I give to demonstrate that is I start looking at what Westerners have come up with to explain the real cause of, say, a terror attack. So Bill Nye, the science guy, when the Bataclan terror attack happened in Paris, where, you know, they say Allahu Akbar and they invoke this particular Quranic verse and so on, he said, no, that was due to, it was very conceivable that it was due to climate change. And then he gives you a causal explanation for how that attack was due to lack of solar panels or too much carbon emissions. That's ostrich parasitic syndrome. Ostrich parasitic syndrome is thinking that the Brussels attackers, I think, that committed the attack there, had been lacking in the exposure to art. I mean, who amongst us didn't see enough Chagall and Picasso and end up going to put bombs because, you know, I'm just missing art? So it's so laughable, it's so silly, because in this case, you view it as instinctually wrong to ever blame it on an ideology, on a religion. And therefore, you'll bury your head in the sand, you'll come up with alternate explanations, even though the perpetrators are telling you why they're doing it. That's what OPS is.
I will get on to religion and ideology, because
Sure.
that's a big part of your book as well.
Sure.
And quite a controversial part. I know you've had a lot of feedback about. To what degree is the problem that perhaps though the mainstream media, including influential entertainment platforms, act as an echo chamber for the progressivism or the woke culture, how hard is it to battle something that is now so entrenched? I mean, they've actually made rules about what certain movies and adverts and should feature.
Well, look, so let me give an analogy from evolutionary medicine, and you'll see I'll tie it back all together. So in evolutionary medicine, we know the following. If you take children who grew up in a very allergen-free environment, sterile environment, you have OCD parents that are always cleaning. There's no dust, there's no pet dander. Versus kids who've grown up in environments where these allergens are present, the latter kids end up having fewer autoimmune diseases, say, for example, asthma, precisely because the immune system expects to be challenged by these allergens in order to optimally function. So then I take that principle and I say the human mind has also evolved to be exposed to opposing ideas, ideological allergens. That allows me to hone my debating skills. if I'm never challenged on anything that I ever say, I can't present the optimal message that hopefully will persuade you, because I've never had any feedback, any blowback, right? So now I come to your question. If I live in an echo chamber, say a journalistic echo chamber, where 90% of the people are fully on board with anything that I say, then there is no allergen that says, wait a minute, I think what you're saying there is complete BS, right? Look at academia. So I discuss in the Parasitic Mind, these are studies by other folks, where they looked at the political orientation of professors at top universities in the United States. Riz, it's astonishing. Now, let me explain some numbers. In science, if you say that something has an effect of a 1.2 odds ratio, it would be like, if let's say I'm checking the pharmaceutical efficacy of a drug. So 1.2, so it's a placebo versus an actual drug. 1.2 to 1 means that it's 20% more effective. So 1 to 1.2 is a big number. What if I tell you it's 1 to 80? So that's not even, I mean, you don't even pick that up in science. It's such a, now why am I saying this? In many disciplines, the ratio is 37 to 1, 130 to 1, meaning that sociology departments, you're as likely to see a conservative Republican sociologist as you are to see a dog with wings flying. That's not good. Why? Because if you're a student, there are certain topics of discussion that you would really be enriched to hear both sides. Is the death penalty ever moral? Should we be an isolationist or an interventionist cult? And there are very valid arguments on both sides of the political aisle. Political orientation doesn't matter in neuroscience, because the way neurons fire is the way neurons fire, irrespective of what your political orientation is. But in sociology, in anthropology, in some fields of psychology, in economics, having a greater exposure to more ideas can only benefit me, certainly as a student. And so we're literally cheating our students by creating this kind of sterile environment.
With the Parasitic Mind, I was actually surprised how many times to which you referred back to the state of educational institutions and so on. I mean, you know, it's not something I would ever have had a perspective on, but you seem to think it's really bad.
It's horrifying. Look, and in the Parasitic Mind, I only gave a few examples of letters that were sent to me from people who, for whatever reason, had broken some sacred cow. So I'll give you one example. Some graduate student writes to me, I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the exact quote, "Dear Professor Saad, my supervisor with whom I've been working on this paper for 2 years has decided to take off my name off the paper because he heard that I said something positive about Donald Trump, and now I fear that I have no future here. Are you accepting doctoral students?" Now that student wasn't writing to me from Yemen or North Korea or communist China. He was writing to me from a major North American university. Is that the kind of environments we want to be fostering in universities? I don't think so.
How does it affect you as an academic to be able to go out and say things the way you say? I mean, I know you've said tenure doesn't give you like total protection.
It doesn't protect me from death threats.
Right.
Look, it doesn't affect me in the sense that I never modulate my speech as a function of careerist concerns. And I'll tell you why. I have a very exacting code of personal conduct. I'm my worst critic, meaning that at the end of the day, when I'm putting my head on the pillow to sleep, the only thing that will stop me from tossing and turning in insomnia is if I was fraudulent in defending the truth. If I wasn't the guy that when I heard the old lady screaming, I didn't intervene. So if I ever say, I better not say this because maybe this will be the consequence, maybe I'm being too harsh on myself, I would feel as though I'm being fraudulent. How could I be the truth defender if I ever modulate what I truly consider to be the truth? And so therefore, I've never modulated. I don't care.
So you've never not hit post on the button?
I never not hit the post. Never. It's not a reflex that I have. Listen, Riz, literally on any given morning by 10 o'clock, I have posted more controversial stuff than all other academics alive combined it's just I don't care. Now, it's not I don't care because I'm an irreverent a-hole who doesn't care about people's feelings, but because you need people in academia to be willing to say what, by the way, the silent majority agrees with me. So I could show you millions of emails from truckers and corrections officers and policemen and majors in the Canadian Army and other professors who say, thank you that you exist. I would have lost my mind if you were not around. So I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, but you have to be a truth teller. And that's why you get invited to Elon Musk's house.
Well, so you're getting these kind of responses. Do you feel it's having any real impact on the situation the way you see it?
I mean, not only because of me. I mean, there aren't too many people in academia who do what I do, but Donald Trump does it. Elon Musk does it. There are a few people in high positions of power that are irreverent honey badgers. Joe Rogan doesn't. Why did Joe Rogan become Joe Rogan? People have asked me this. Because he is fearless. He's willing to speak to anybody. There is no topic that he's not willing to address. He's intellectually curious. He's engaged. Why didn't Kamala Harris agree to go? Because she can't go and be her authentic self for 3 hours with a guy that he's never given me a script of what we just press the button and off we go. We may talk about Bigfoot or we may talk about psychology of decision making. I have no idea where we're going. Well, it takes a strength of character to be able to be sufficiently confident to sit in front of a camera where 20 million people are going to consume this without knowing what's coming at you. The reason why he can do it and I can do it is because we're authentic people. And so be authentic. By the way, in the book Between Suicidal Empathy and Parasitic Mind, which is called The Sad Truth About Happiness, right. I have a whole section on what the ancient Greeks already told us. Know thyself, be authentic. And so I try to live with full authenticity.
Does that controversial position risk at all you not becoming James Bond?
Did you see me tagging Jeff Bezos?
Yeah, I saw that lovely picture there of you.
By the way, people think that was AI. It's not a real photo.
No, of course I know.
Yeah. No, but some people thought it was real.
Right. Yeah. No, it's amazing. Yeah. It just you looked a bit too comfortable with that Aston Martin.
Well, so Jeff Bezos, who's head of Amazon, I think the next James Bond is being done through Amazon Studio. I hope I'm not misspeaking. And so to play along,
that's right.
I tagged him and I said, "You're looking for the next James Bond." Now, here's the question for you, the really important question. Can I pull off being James Bond at my current height? Yes, I'm astonishingly good looking, but am I tall enough to be James Bond? Give the right answer, Riz.
Well, I mean, look, there are presets. They say president, how many bald presidents have there been in the US? And there's so many of these characteristics people analyze. I was just thinking, as the kind of person you are, you could shoot first and ask questions later then.
Exactly. And by the way, so we've had, my daughter who's sitting here off camera grew up, and my other child, they've grown up with Belgian Shepherds. Are you familiar with Belgian Shepherds? Right. So Belgian Shepherds are usually the dogs that are used in all the military.
Oh, the
Malinois. The Malinois are one of four types of Belgian Shepherds, and so they grew up with these Belgian Shepherds. And I always say, to your point about shoot first, ask questions later, our male, his motto in life was he attacks everything in sight, and then he worries about the consequences later. So maybe that's why I picked them.
Yeah, it's a German Shepherd Alsatian, as I grew up calling them. So there'll be no double oive. Now, for those very wary of that woke culture and the situation the way it is, there is a reluctance to speak out. You've spoken out quite a lot when it comes to religion and Islam in particular, and that's caused a lot of debate. Of course, you defend yourself and say, I'm not Islamophobic. But there is a tone in the way you describe things that make it sound like you believe all Muslims are bad. Yeah. It sounds like that. And I know you do say, no, not all Muslims are bad, but it sounds like that.
Look, the distribution of goodness and badness is not limited to one group. There are demonic Jews and there are lovely Jews. There are horrible Muslims. There are lovely Muslims. It's nothing dispositional, right? It's not Jews are kind or evil, Christians are, right? So individuals, I hold no ill will towards anybody. I'm friends with more Muslims than probably most people will ever meet in their lives. How could that have happened if I think that all Muslims, right? On the other hand, I'm also shaped by reality. So let me give you a few examples that might help. We had to escape Lebanon because of which religion? My parents were kidnapped and tortured by which religion? My Syrian ancestors left Syria because of which religion? My brother-in-law's family left Egypt because of which religion? My wife's family in Lebanon had to leave, they're Armenian, because of which religion? Their ancestors escaped the Armenian genocide because of which religion? So certainly, I can put together in a nomological network that reality while recognizing that individual Muslims might even go out of their way to defend me, right? And they're perfectly noble and kind and peaceful. Islam, though, is a set of ideas that are codified. And then we could say, does Islam promote greater personal liberties and freedoms? Yes or no? There is only these answers. It's either yes or it's no, right? I would venture that based on historical facts, it doesn't promote greater personal liberties and freedoms. And so I can't be Islamophobic in saying that. It's a nonsensical term, as I recently had a conversation with Piers Morgan. I am a Islamo-realist. I recognize that the great majority of Muslims, like in any other grouping, are perfectly lovely, but the codified ideology of Islam, does it promote individual dignity? No.
The nomological record you quoted, though, sounded more like personal baggage.
Right.
So it sounds like, it's your own kind of...
I'm informed by my personal history, but I can share the data from realities that have nothing to do with me, and it's not going to be a good outcome for Islam.
Could you not look at all religions, though, at the basic root in, having come from centuries ago, or even millennia ago, as having certain characteristics that could equally be compared, when you say when it comes to freedoms and so on?
No. So, for example, badminton is a sport and MMA fighting is a sport. They're both called sports. The likelihood of my getting a head injury is not the same in badminton as it is in MMA fighting, even though they're both called sports, right? So the content of religions matter. If you are a Jain and a practicing Jain, by definition, because of the codified content in Jainism, you're a pacifist. As a matter of fact, you're so much of a pacifist that as you walk down the street, you walk with a broom, lest you might inadvertently step on an ant. So an extremist Jain is one who is extremely peaceful, right? On the other hand, if you're Jewish, then you're not going to eat shrimp or pork. If you are Christian, you're going to eat the prosciutto sandwich. So there are real consequences to the content of what's codified in those books. Now, Islam is a proselytizing religion. It says that there are two binary encampments of the world. There is Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. Dar al-Harb is the house of war. Any land that is not yet under Islamic dominion is one that inshallah will be conquered. Now, is there 1400 years of history that supports that edict? I would venture yes. There are 56 countries that are members of the OIC today that once upon a time were not Islamic. On the other hand, Judaism really sucks at expansionism, right? It's a terribly bad marketing religion because it can't seem to attract new customers. Why? Because it's not a proselytizing religion. As a matter of fact, it's forbidden to convert others. As a matter of fact, if Riz Khan wants to become Jewish, the theological position is you should be dissuaded because that's an honest measure of your desire to become Jewish. On the other hand, in Islam, you just say the Shahada publicly and voila, you're now Muslim. So Islam is a brilliant religion when it comes to expansion. Judaism is the exact opposite of brilliant. So I talk about the ideas behind the religion, never about the individuals.
But isn't there a danger, and I know you've addressed this before as well, but just for our audience, of mistaking cultural behavior for what is actually religious behavior?
Of course, although these tend to go together. I mean, culture doesn't evolve out of a vacuum. By the way, if people ask me, for example, what am I will, my first instinct is to say I'm Lebanese. So I'm very, very much wedded and proud of my Arabic culture, right? My mother tongue is Arabic. The food that we eat is Arabic. I've tried to make my children listen to the Arabic music that I grew up with in Lebanon, right? There are many elements of the Middle Eastern culture that are uniquely beautiful. The culture of hospitality is true. I mean, yes, there are many cultures that have hospitality, but really, the orgy of hospitality of a Middle Eastern home is something gorgeous, right? And so, yes, we can debate which parts are due to culture, which parts are due to religion, but it would take someone that truly suffers from ostrich parasitic syndrome to say that there's absolutely no evidence that Islam has ever done anything incorrect historically.
I don't think people would necessarily argue that, but what I got the sense from the parasitic mind is you're equating Islam to essentially the Middle East. And the reality is that there's only a small minority, technically, of Muslims who are from the Middle East. You have Kazakhstan, you have Indonesia.
Of course.
Of
course. And depending on, you're right, depending on the cultural ecosystem, then the manifestation of the religion will take a different shade. So you're exactly right. It is an interaction. So I concede that point. But again, if we link it to, say, immigration patterns, look, Montreal, where we're sitting right now, is a place that I moved to from the Lebanese Civil War in 1975. From 1975 to 1998. And the reason why I remember it is because it was sort of an episodic memory for me. In 1998 was the first time that I ever saw a woman veiled. So from 1975 to 1998, I never saw it. From 1998 to today, I could walk out of my house, 5 out of the first 10 women that I see are veiled. Now, most of those women are obviously not bad people and are perfectly lovely and they want to sit down and have hummus with me. That's fine. But the reality is, could I have predicted, based on the immigration patterns in Montreal, whether Jew hatred was going to go up or go down in Montreal? It doesn't take a fancy professor to give you that prognosis, right? Or that prediction. Well, and the reality is there's been an orgiastic, exponential increase in Jew hatred in Montreal. And it's largely driven by the fact of these demographic changes. So we have to be able to say that openly without being accused of Islamophobia.
Isn't though it important to look at, say, the root causes now in many cases, perhaps, and yes, you've pointed out that Jews have been persecuted through the centuries. So it dates back way beyond any modern conflict. But a lot of the time, the misrepresentation, I guess, even in the media, is that the Israeli-Palestinian situation is a Muslim-Jewish thing. Well, technically, it's more a land issue. I mean, there are roots based in it. But the danger in equating these two is that suddenly it becomes all Muslims against all Jews. It can become like that. So don't you have to be a little careful not to kind of promote that idea?
Yeah, although if I respectfully would disagree with the idea that it's actually a land issue. I think it's very much of a theological issue. Golda Meir, I'm paraphrasing her, said that when the Palestinians love their children more than they hate ours, there'll be peace. She also said that if we lay down our arms, there'd be a massacre. If they lay down their arms, there'd be peace. The idea that I grew up in the Middle East, and I explained it in the Parasitic Mind, when Gamal Abdel Nasser died, the Pan-Arabist Egyptian president, and Lebanese people take to the street lamenting his death, and the number one scream that they say is death to Jews, explain to me what is the reflex by which coming down the street from where I lived, screaming death to Jews, is a reflection of the land battle in Israel. We had nothing to do with Israel. We're not Israeli. We're Lebanese. We've always been in Lebanon. We speak Arabic. Why death to Jews? They didn't say death to Zionists.
Yeah, I think, well, that's the reason that generally in the media it's mixed up and people don't differentiate between Zionists and Jews. And a lot of that mixed messaging means now, for example, saying anything against Israel, whether it's not against Jewish people as such, though I know Israel is primarily, is seen as anti-Semitic. And this is where, there seems an imbalance in how people can address issues. Now, if you say everyone should be fearless and say the truth, then people should be able to talk about Israel without being labeled anti-Semitic.
I completely agree, by the way, with what you just said. it is a complete canard to say that any criticism of Israel is tantamount to anti-Semitism. That can't be, right? In no different a way than criticizing some policy that the Mongolian government has come out with is an attack on on Mongolian people. So I'm not a proponent of that. As a matter of fact, I'm so much, by the way, of a free speech absolutist, as you probably know. I support the right of Holocaust deniers to spew their nonsense. What could be more offensive, I mean, literally by definition, than to reject the Holocaust, the systematic erasure on an industrial scale level of an entire people? But in a free society, you have to tolerate falsehood spreaders. You have to tolerate racists and bigots and anti-Semites. I think the problem in the Middle East is that it is a part of one's identity to despise the Jew. Does that mean everybody's like that? No. But I grew up with that. I lived it. I interact with those people. I'll give you a great...
Please. Go.
This is a story that I've only mentioned a few times, but it's going to be in Suicidal Empathy. First semester at Cornell, doctoral student, I became friends with a bunch of Arab guys playing soccer all the time. As you would expect, we all love soccer. We all met, most of them were Lebanese. At one point, one of those guys asked me to go out for coffee. So I went out with him for coffee. As we sat there, I'm wondering what he wants to, because we hadn't hung out socially. Gad, you're a very smart guy. So thanks. How come you haven't converted yet to the true faith? So then I said, this is not going to go well if that's what we're here for. So then he kind of realized that that's not going to go well. Then he kind of pauses and he kind of looks into the air, a bit conflicted, and goes, Gad, I really like you. I said, why do you say that with some hesitancy? Oh, I know. Is it because I'm Jewish? He goes, no, but come on, you're not really a Jew. I said, no, I'm a Jew. But what did he mean by that? He had an exemplar of the type of person that he has to hate as a Jew. But this guy is Lebanese. He speaks Arabic. He plays soccer better than all of them combined. That doesn't fit the exemplar of the Jew that I was taught to hate. So it's that reflex that you have to get rid of. Once the Middle East gets rid of that kind of hatred, it will flourish in ways that are unimaginable to both of us.
And I go back to the fact that your reference point is the Middle East and a personal experience with it. Isn't the danger, though, if you're going to talk about Islam in a generic way, like as you have in the Parasitic Mind, that people in Indonesia, in Kazakhstan, places where they don't necessarily have a kind of real reference point for the Middle East, except the fact they share the religion, that they will start to feel, kind of disenfranchised and then perhaps emotionally against Jewish people.
Well, and that's why I say that it really depends on the context.
There is also the interpretation that is often taken wrongly, which we see in all religions as well. Isn't the danger, though, that it's what's being done is being done politically? I mean,
by whom?
And even many Muslims would argue it's not being done religiously, the extremists.
Right. That
they might use the name of Islam to do what they do, but it's a political thing. A lot of the stuff that happens is political. Isn't it important to address that? Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, of course, although 90% of Islam is political Islam. So people, for example, I did a whole show once on Islam versus Islamism. There is no such thing. As a matter of fact, Erdogan literally said that. There is no radical Islam. There is no militant Islam. There's no extremist Islam. There is no Islamism. There's just Islam, right? And I could show you 100 other imams who said the exact same thing. Islam, again, is a codified set of ideas. Islamism is within Islam. There is a spiritual element of Islam. There's a political element of Islam. As a matter of fact, in Islam, there is great concern for the kuffar, for the non-believer, because again, we need to convert those guys, right? Judaism is live and let live. That's why it never grows, because you don't bring in new adherents to the faith, right? So imagine if now Islam said, look, we're going to get rid of all the expansionism. No more supremacy, no more. We're going to truly adopt a message of live and let live. Then all of the beauty of Islamic society can truly flourish, because I'm the first to understand Islamic poetry, Islamic architecture, the era of Islamic science. So it's not as though there aren't an incredible number of things within that cultural trajectory that we can be proud of.
The reason I'm getting into or sticking with the idea that it's the politics that drive so much is that you don't see, people from Kazakhstan, and I use that as an example because I know the country and it's a Muslim country, or largely Indonesia, or any of these countries where the people behave in any radicalized way that has an impact on Western nations. That's why I'm wondering where your reference point is very much the Middle East and the politics of the Middle East that result in what we're seeing a lot of the time.
That's true. As I said, depending on the ecosystem, different variants of the manifestation of Islam will take place, right? So it's not as though in every Islamic country they're going around beheading everybody who's not Muslim. Look, we were fine in Lebanon until we weren't. It's the shingles analogy, right? It's there. But is there an Islamic society, including the more tame ones, where a non-Muslim can become the top person? Can a Jew become the president of Kazakhstan? That would be a manifestation of complete plurality and multiculturalism. So the fact that a society that is Islamic doesn't go around beheading everybody in sight, to me, is not really an impressive thing. Truly impressive would be in the same way that we allow in the West for thousands of mosques to be built because we are so kind and compassionate. Let's see the reciprocal kindness in Islamic societies. Let's see a flourishing of endless churches, Buddhist temples, and mosques, Jewish temples, synagogues, and then we will have true equality.
I think it's happening in places. I mean, my base is Dubai, and I see temples and churches and everything.
Inshallah.
Yeah. I'm not a theological expert, so I wanted to get your perspective on it because I know you've spoken very strongly about it, and I wanted to raise the counter arguments I hear about how you address this, because I think it is quite important that the debate is out there, and I know it's a sensitive one, so people do get very touchy about it, and I know you get a reaction to a lot of it. What's going to come up? Let's move on to your next piece of work now. You're going to go on to the suicidal empathy, and how it ties into what you've done in the parasitic mind, because I understand it's expanding on the ideas and thoughts of that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the parasitic mind looks at what happens to our cognitive system when it is parasitized. Remember earlier I talked about thoughts versus feelings. So it's a two-pronged attack to zombify us. First, I need to zombify your thought process. That's the parasitic mind. But then I need to zombify your emotional system. Now I've really got you zombified. Now you really are the spider that is being taken haplessly into the burrow, right? Exactly. So that's what suicidal empathy does, is it completes the story, and it says that I need to hijack both your thought processes and your emotional system to then render you zombified. And so that's the point of suicidal empathy. And then what I do in the book is I demonstrate how many disastrous public policy decisions stem from suicidal empathy. So let's take, say, our views on criminality. When, say, you decide that a felon, it's not fair that we don't give him a second chance. And by second chance, it means that he's been arrested 87 times before. That is suicidal empathy. Now, where does it come from? It comes from the progressive view that criminals, to the extent that they are criminals, and especially if they have melanin that's a bit darker, it can't be because they are inherently criminals, because there are natural variations across individuals in terms of how they acquire resources. It must be because society failed them, right? So what is the point of you putting in prison a criminal when he's already been victimized by society, right? That's not, life is about cause and effect. If you rape someone, you should be punished severely. If you kill someone, now, by the way, to some extent, maybe it's too harsh, Sharia law understands this very well, right? Because it is if anything, it is actually more wedded to human nature than the progressives. It might be better to be under Sharia law.
You're waving a flag for Islam.
Now, there you go. You see what a good guy I am. So no, but my point is that legal codes have to be rooted in an understanding of human nature. when there are no consequences to all of your bad deeds, is it any surprise that criminality is going to go up? So, for example, when San Francisco, you probably remember this, puts out a thing that says, we're not going to penalize any theft that is under $950. Do you need a fancy evolutionary behavioral scientist to tell you what's going to happen? I mean, it's cause and effect. So what I do in Suicidal Empathy is I go through domestic policies, foreign policies, all of which result in disastrous consequences because of the misfiring of empathy.
What's your thought on the way that things like the suicidal empathy is being enhanced by social media, by the term bleeding heart liberal is an interesting one. I'll tell you why, because that's the first thing that came into my mind when you said the way you described it. I came from Britain to America when I moved from one channel to another, and liberal in Britain didn't mean what it does in the USA. So it was quite confusing for me. But then this term bleeding heart liberal came up, which I presume is your typical
suicidally empathetic person.
Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's taken even to an extreme at this point. So a bleeding heart liberal is kind of stage 1 of suicidal empathy, right? So suicidal empathy is stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It's death, right? Because look, so there's a paper that I wrote a few years ago with one of my former doctoral students, where we looked at how do people allocate their gift-giving expenditures, okay? Yeah. And the idea there was to demonstrate that we have a built-in evolutionary mechanism that mets out our resources in line with an evolutionary calculus. I'm much more likely to give larger gifts to people who share on average half their genes with me, my brothers and sisters, my children, than I am to give to my second cousin, right? And you see this throughout all cultures, all religions, all ethnicities, because we're all biological beings united under a shared biological heritage. Why am I saying all this? Our empathy should also be strategically meted out in a way that makes evolutionary sense, right? It makes more evolutionary sense for me to be willing to sacrifice my life to save my biological children than it is for me to save a random child. The fact that I'm less likely to save a random child doesn't make me a monster or calculus. I would love to save all children, but I'm certainly more likely to jump in front of the fast-moving truck to save my biological children. Right. That's the problem with suicidal empathy, is that system is dysregulated. The El Salvadorian MS-13 gang members, they deserve more empathy coming in here illegally than American vets who lost their limbs fighting for America. That's suicidal empathy.
So this is the expression, going back to the gift giving, charity begins at home.
Exactly.
Is where it comes from too.
Perfect.
And I think in that study you also talked about how women and men are different.
Yes, you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So in that paper, what we wanted to show is what are the reasons that men and women say they are giving gifts to their romantic partners. So the reasons could be either situational or tactical. Situational would be, it's her birthday. It's a situational, okay? Tactical would be, I'm trying to woo her to seduce her, right? Now, not surprisingly, men are much more likely to use the gift-giving ritual for tactical reasons. It's part of the dynamics of men and women. But here's the part that's much more interesting. When you ask men and women, why do you think the other sex gives you gifts? Women are perfectly well calibrated in knowing that the reason that they give gifts to men are different than the reasons why men give them gifts, whereas men are blissfully oblivious to that. So men think, oh, if she gives me a gift, it must be because she's trying to seduce me, because they lack the theory of mind. I'm not saying that men are dumber, but it's because they don't have to have evolved the reading of that courtship ritual. Because if a man is lied to by a woman says, here are flowers, I'll love you forever, let's go behind the shed and have sex. If she lied to him, great. I don't suffer any consequences. If a woman were to be duped by every flower-carrying guy, given that the cost of making a poor mate choice looms much larger for her,
Right.
then she better evolve the capacity to understand those signals.
Professor, what do you think artificial intelligence will do to change, either for good or bad, the parasitic mind or suicidal empathy?
Wow, I've never been asked that exact question. So there you go. Yeah, that's why you're Riz Khan. Look, at this point, I think that the main thing that AI does is it reduces the computational complexity of the search space. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
So for our listeners and viewers, so take for example chess. If you were to draw out the chess game, the tree of chess, it's I think 10 to the 100 nodes. That's more nodes than there are atoms in the universe, right? So if you were to develop an algorithm to actually exhaustively go through everything, it will be more time than since the sun has existed. Therefore, there are AI algorithms that prune the search tree, that can say, this is not promising, cut this part. And I first learned of this as a mathematics computer science student in the mid 80s. And I was very excited about AI, but then AI went through a winter storm kind of where it died out. And it's only in the last 5-10 years that it has resurfaced. So I really see things like in medical diagnostics and in things where it can do searches so quickly and in much quicker way than a human could ever. That's where I see. I'm not a fatalist when it comes to AI. The machines are going to take over and eradicate us. I don't know what else to say.
It's not so much that. What's interesting is it still suffers to some degree, AI, from the biases that are programmed into the big data that it draws from.
Like when you ask it for George Washington, it comes out with a black guy.
Oh,
have you seen that?
No.
Oh, you didn't see those?
No.
Gemini, when Gemini first came out, because it had been programmed by super woke people, every single historical figure in the United States came out as a black individual.
That's interesting.
You should go back. And now they've checked it. They've kind of recalibrated it.
Now, I don't know if this was, someone playing around or whether it was real, but there was a time, many years ago, if you typed into Google, white men stole my car, it used to ask, did you mean black men stole your car? So there was this idea that, that the garbage in, garbage out situation with AI meant that, up to now, it's going to have its biases. But the reason I ask is, I did an interview recently with Mo Gaudat, who was the former chief business officer of Google X. Okay. Brilliant guy, brilliant AI specialist. I mean, he's quite spectacular, actually, in his thought processes. And he described how, right now, if you just have even 20 IQ points above someone else, it's a massive difference as a human. AI is going to go to the billion level, where it's way beyond. And in that, there's a certain amount of self-awareness, cognizance, and so on. But it can also be something that if we are becoming more and more dependent on AI, we might be able to escape some of the things that you worry about.
That's a great question. Yeah. I mean, so you're saying that AI could be so powerful that it builds a cognitive inoculation against the parasitic ideas.
Exactly, in the sense that it can actually start to, regulate the information that we receive when we do searches to take us out of an echo chamber. It can actually fact check to the point where it's indisputable.
Right. So here's how I can tie what you're saying with something that I've been thinking about. So do you remember the nomological networks that I was telling you about?
Yeah.
As it stands, it takes a great amount of human effort to build that network. And one of the papers that I recently wrote about 3-4 years ago is I wrote a paper, an academic paper, a scientific paper, where I was arguing, imagine if you could now create a Wikipedia of nomological networks. So you ask what is the foundational question that you want to see if you can build a nomological network about, right? Are toy preferences sex specific for evolutionary reasons? Well, it took me, a human being, to say, well, what would be the different distinct lines of evidence that I would have to come up with to prove that there is a universality to these toy preferences? Imagine if that process could be automatized via AI.
And not only that, the access to far wider range of data without having to try to figure out where to go for it, and then the speed with which it would come.
Exactly.
So that's what I'm wondering, whether you see any salvation, you see any inoculation, as you put it, to the parasitic mind.
I mean, as a sort of banal yes or no, I would say yes. But to our earlier point, that AI system is only as good as what I put into it. If what is being put into it is done by parasitized human minds, then who knows?
So Mo, funny enough, just to go back to something he said, he's writing his next book with an AI he has created called Trixie.
Trixie.
And he says, if I ask Trixie questions, I get surprising answers. For example, as a Middle Eastern, he's of Egyptian origin, Middle Eastern man, would you, if you were a border officer at, in America, would you grant me access? She said, under current rules, no. So she was quite frank with him.
Wow.
So that's why it's quite we're in an interesting point, I think, a cross point maybe of where AI might actually address with some degree of accuracy and perhaps be a bit of a wake-up call for some of the issues that you seem to have a lot of concern about.
It really is a fantastic question. As you're speaking, I'm thinking about it. I wonder if the AI system might be better at inoculating parasitic thinking rather than parasitic emotional systems, because there is an element that I can codify when it comes to facts and information. It's a lot more how do you parameterize emotions via an AI system?
Well, that apparently is the next step. AI can get to the stage where it's, emotions are firing of neurons. I mean, my background is neurophysiology.
That's true.
So it's kind of ironic. We are literally, in a way, form of
Are your parents disappointed you didn't become a doctor?
Well, I think my mother kept saying until she saw me on TV, and it was like...
Then it was okay.
She said, no, she just said, is that a real job? But I do think, listening to people who are experts on this, that it might be an interesting situation. I wonder how that's going to tie in with your work, because everything will be factually far more accurate. The veracity of information will be far more, metrically codified and accurate.
Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it, but I know that my wife recently was interacting with Grok.
Oh, yeah.
Grok 3 or whatever.
X.
The X one. And because we have different options right now we're facing in our personal lives in terms of different universities. Yeah. In terms of universities that are making me offers. And so she was entering into Grok, what's the best place for us to live? And then she came up to me very excitedly because she said, this Grok is so smart. And so,
She said, wait, Montreal.
No. I don't think Grok is ever going to come up with that. If it comes up with that, it must be a scam. Yeah. Montreal is no longer the place for us.
So it's interesting, you're getting a lot of offers. In spite of your willing to jab at academia.
Yeah, well, so can I tell you why? Because I think the zeitgeist is changing.
Okay.
Because the exact same people who were mortified that there was a professor who was talking about such corrosive things such as, oh no, only women can bear children. Yes, freedom of speech is important. Freedom of inquiry is important. Well, those people are now realizing that they really went down the rabbit hole. And not all the universities, many of universities still think I'm, the ostracized pariah. But a greater number of universities are now coming around, maybe because Donald Trump won, who knows. But so a lot of schools that historically would have shied away from speaking to me are now, there's the Gad love train is in full motion right now.
And you're ready to ride it.
I'm riding it.
Go ahead. You've seen, as someone, who deals with this kind of behavioral psychology of people, the various movements that come up, and you've touched on a couple of them. The Me Too, for example, and Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
You see more of these kind of things happening along, that we will see more of these kind of movements that I know you see as on the verge of whether it's suicidal empathy or parasitic behavior ideology.
As I said earlier, the capacity for the human mind to be parasitized in endless number of ways is an inherent feature of, the architecture of the human mind. So I can't predict whether there'll be more or less, but it's just, by the way, when I first started my training as a doctoral student, I was studying one type of rationality. And I hope this doesn't get too technical. You'll tell me if it's boring. So are you familiar with the work of Kahneman and Tversky? Do you know? Kahneman and Tversky are two Israeli psychologists, actually. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work that he did in psychology. Tversky didn't win it, his co-author, because he passed away before they won it, and you can't get it posthumously. Yeah. But what their work was meant to show was that the hyper-rational expectation that economists have of us, that we are these perfect calculational machines. When I'm choosing which car to buy, I look at all of the alternatives, and then I use some utility maximization function to say that it's going to be the Mazda. That's not how people make decisions, right? So for example, here's a violation that they identified. It's called the transitivity axiom. If I prefer car A to car B, and I prefer car B to car C, it must be that I prefer car A to car C. That's called transitivity. If I don't do that, I'm being, quote, irrational. But throughout 40 years of work, they showed that consumers are hardly rational in the way economists expect us. And so it is an indelible feature of the human condition to have these little blind spots, in the same way that you can do experiments in psychophysics, where you could show certain visual illusions that people succumb to. We also have these mental spots so I don't expect that moving forward we will be less likely to succumb to this. It's just part of the lacuna of the human spirit.
So one of the interesting things is that we live in a very different era now from even decades ago and centuries ago. So even tying into religion, for example, word spreads so much faster.
That's true.
Everything gets seen so much faster. Judgments get much, much faster. So in the same way, decision making is sometimes through speed.
Yeah.
And people react. And do you recall that the head of the women's soccer in Spain, Luis Rubiales,
the kiss?
Yeah, kissing. Yeah. And he just got sentenced, or he just got the adjudication was that he was guilty of doing this. And of course, it gave a lot of power to the Me Too movement in Spain when this happened. Now, there would have been a time where this wouldn't have gone around.
Yeah.
And I wonder how this interconnectivity, the greater interconnectivity we have.
That's a great question. So certainly the fact that we've got these systems that can spread information so quickly makes it more viral, to continue with the metaphor. I mean, does that mean, so are you arguing that by virtue of the fact that the speed at which the stuff can disseminate, does that mean that increases the likelihood of the inoculation or decreases it?
No, I'm saying that, at the moment it increases the chance of
being parasitic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, although the antidote also
is communicated.
Is communicated, right? So, I mean, I wouldn't have had, I don't know, 1 million followers on X. I wouldn't have met the people. The people that have been drawn to my work would never have known that I existed, Elon Musk, were it not that there was a central square where my ideas can be, because historically, think about a typical academic. What was my medium of communication? It was the peer-reviewed journal, right? And you want to know how many people read that journal? You know how many people say the average number of academic papers that's cited is 0. Now, there are some papers that are cited 3,000 times, but even an incredibly successful academic paper that's cited 3,000 times, how does that compare with me putting up a post yesterday that was viewed by 10 million people?
That's remarkable.
And so I think, to your point, both the parasitic stuff can increase, but the antidote could also increase.
As we get towards the end of our conversation, a couple of things that occurred to me as someone, especially as you specialized in consumer behavior, but as an evolutionary behavioral scientist, do you believe human behaviors are cyclical? And the reason I ask is, my daughter, who's only a couple of years older than yours, is big on thrifting. And, this very, conspicuous consumption.
She's something that
she kind of, is sort of to a large degree rejecting. And it's not for a lack of means. It's simply the psychology is now, I want to distance myself from this very visible consumption. And thrifting, I see among her friends as well. It's become kind of trendy. How much do we cycle through these?
That's great. So, of course, historical cycles happen. As a matter of fact, potentially linking it to your daughter's example, do you know that how sexy women's attire is cyclically over the past 100 years correlates with economic conditions within that ecosystem. So it's actually called the hemline index.
Wow.
And this is something that I talk about in The Consuming Instinct, one of my earlier books in 2011, whereby I'm going to see if I remember this correctly. I hope I don't get it wrong. In environments where there is more economic uncertainty, there is a premium on fashion trends and cycles to be sexier. And so yes, I think that the general pattern is that there are cycles. Now, I don't know if your daughter's thriftiness is a manifestation of something inherent to her personality, or I think you're arguing that it is part of a group dynamic.
It seems to be part of a group dynamic, but she appreciates it.
Yeah. So what is it? So how does that manifest itself? She never wants to dress in brand names. She wants to be frugal.
It's not so much that. It's just saying, hey, I can find great stuff that's been pre-owned, as they would say now.
Okay,
we used to say used, but to use the euphemism, pre-owned, and she finds amazing stuff.
Yeah, see that would never work with me, and maybe I'm sharing too much here with your audience. I suffer from huge germ contamination fear.
Right.
So, for example, when I go even to a 5-star hotel, I bring my own sheets.
Okay.
And so the idea of wearing someone else's clothes would not work with this guy's psychology.
Right. So that would. The other thing is that after COVID, after lockdowns where people couldn't go, there was a lot of what I read about, a lot of revenge buying, they called it, like consumers, feeling they'd been deprived for a certain period of time and almost in revenge going out and
they're going to compensate for having been. Yeah. Right, I hadn't heard that term, but that makes a lot of sense to me.
Revenge buying. So.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why I decided that I will use consumer behavior as a place to study human nature is precisely because, short of breathing, consumption is probably the thing that we do most next. I mean, we consume friendships, we consume experiences, we consume religion, we consume literature. So it's not just consumption of Coca-Cola and Starbucks. I mean, we are a consumatory animal. So I thought, what a wonderful place it would be to take my interest in evolutionary psychology and apply it to the modern context of consumer behavior, hence that marriage.
Just as, again, wrapping up now, do you remain optimistic about the way things are going? I mean, you said we're at a certain zeitgeist, but are you really optimistic about things changing for the better on your terms, of course, the parasitic mind, the suicidal empathy? And so
I do. I am, in the sense that it would be hard to get out of bed given the things that I do and deal with, if I didn't think that there's a way to make things better. But on a day-to-day basis, it could be easy to fall trap to a lot of pessimism, because sometimes when I see the stuff that comes my way, and even though 99.9% of the people are incredibly supportive of what I do, 0.01% of a very big number is still a big number. And so that can, gnaw at you. But overall, I'm someone who has a sunny disposition. And so therefore, I would say I am optimistic.
I raised this, actually, it made me think about how many people I know who are anti-woke culture, but won't say so. So that's why I was curious when you said you have 90-something plus % in terms of support. So do you think there are a lot of people out there who want to say something, say anti-woke, for example, and, or against the woke culture, but don't dare say it because they could be victimized?
Oh, my God. That's the number one reason why the woke stuff was able to proliferate, right? So let me give you, and I've said this before, here is the perfect template of probably the most common email that I've received through all these years. Dear Professor Saad, a bunch of compliments, and then the last sentence is, if you choose to read this letter on your show, please don't mention my name. So then I write back to the person, I say, dear so-and-so, thank you very much for your kind words. I appreciate them. Don't you think the last sentence in your email is precisely why we are in the position we are? And oftentimes that really slaps them in the face, and they'll write back to me and say, but they always argue that they have a uniquely justifiable reason why they shouldn't be the one speaking, right? So if I'm a student, I shouldn't speak because I won't get a good grade. If I'm an assistant professor, I shouldn't speak because I'm going up for tenure. If I am tenured, I shouldn't speak because I'm going for full professor. If I have full professor, I shouldn't speak because I'm applying for a grant. So your career will end, and there's always been a justification for why you shouldn't speak. Speak. Stop being a coward. Don't diffuse the responsibility on a few of us that have to bear all the risks. If we all speak in unison, we'll get rid of the problem by Tuesday.
Well, and academia apart, it's also because there are real world consequences for people in other jobs too, I guess.
Yes, although, and not to seem as though I'm being cavalier about it, whenever someone says that to me, I say the young men who said, I'll go and land on the beaches of Normandy, were they guaranteed safe passage? Or did they know that 80, 90% of them were going to be mowed down as though they were insignificant mosquitoes? Yet they did it. So I understand that people have real concerns. And so I'm not asking people to be reckless martyrs, but just say something. It could be you only say it within the confines of your friends at a bar. If they say something insane, challenge them. We just had a conversation about very difficult subjects. We're going to walk away here feeling good. We're going to still be friends, but we had the courage to tackle thorny subjects. Don't be a coward. Speak.
Now you've got this prominence, and with prominence comes the power to change things, which, as you say, hopefully you are. Would you ever go into politics?
Well, two things. Number one, I'm too short for politics. I don't think so, because I'm way too honest, to our earlier point, which is politicians lie. If I fib a millimeter, I will have a bout of conscience that will debilitate me for the rest of my life. I'm worried if I'm going to jaywalk. So you want me to be a politician? I won't last for 4 minutes.
Well, we prefer you out of politics than saying what you say.
Thank you, sir.
Professor, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was
What a
fantastic.
pleasure.
Thank you. Cheers.
Well, Dr. Gad Saad ending our extended conversation there by calling for people to ignore the woke culture and to champion truth and freedom of speech, whatever the risks. His next book, Suicidal Empathy, is due out this year, 2025, and expands on his best-selling publication, The Parasitic Mind. That's all for now from me, Riz Khan, and the rest of the team. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and comments and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time.